Now, is that clause 3 stand?
Mr Chairman.
Dr Calder.
Mr Chairman, look, clause 3 refers to the Principal Act, and clause 3 provides that this bill amends the Principal Act, and the Principal Act is the Summary Offences Act 1981. Now, it may come as no surprise to members of this House that actually no submissions were received on this clause, because, I mean, effectively, it is what it is. There being no submissions received, the Ministry of Transport, who are our advisors, unsurprisingly made no recommendations. But let's look at what the Summary Offences Act 1981 is. This is the Principal Act, and it's actually quite a solid body of work, Mr Chairman. A solid body of work. Its commencement date, seeing as we've been talking about commencement dates for some time, its commencement date was actually the 1st of February 1982. I just let you know in case anybody was wondering, because we have been talking about commencement, but this is the Principal Act we're talking about here, the Summary Offences Act 1981. And those of you who have been listening to this debate, and it has been brought out by a number of speakers, will recall that the name of this bill is the Summary Offences Possession of High-Powered Laser Pointers Amendment Bill. So this legislation we're debating today amends this Act. This is the Principal Act. So what does this Summary Offences Act do? It's actually quite a remarkable piece of legislation, because it actually brings into its own umbrella deals with a lot of different legislation, and it's pertinent to note that in itself it was an act to reform and restate the law relating to summary offences, not surprisingly given the name of the bill, the Summary Offences Act, and to replace the Police Offences Act 1927 and its amendments. So what we're seeing here is when we're thinking of the Principal Act, is the fluidity and flux involved in legislation, how legislation evolves and in turn is superseded or amended. So what we've got in this piece of legislation in front of us today is actually amending this Principal Act, which is the Summary Offences Act 1981. So what actually does the Summary Offences Act do? Well, it's actually, as I said, quite encyclopedic in its scope. So the first pages, in fact, clause 3 right through to 8, is to deal with offences against public order. Offences against public order. So what might we consider these offences to be? I can see Todd McClay coming up with a few ideas. Disorderly behaviour. Not that he would ever be associated with such an offence against public order himself, being a upstanding minister. Offensive behaviour or language. Offensive behaviour or language. Disorderly behaviour on private premises. Now, we all could have been guilty of that at some stage. We're only human. We are only human. And I've met many good men and women in my life, but I've never met a saint and I've never met an angel. So all of us, at some stage, could have been guilty of disorderly behaviour on private premises. Disorderly assembly. Disorderly assembly. Now this is one that I don't... possibly Mr Sabin in his previous role as a policeman. Associating with convicted thieves. Now, this is definitely one that Mr Sabin will have to look at his broad shoulders. We are very lucky that he has been in part of the thin blue line. The thin blue line. Associated with violent offenders. Violent offenders. And here we are, because this could be describing Mr Sabin's modus operandi and raison d'etre. Raison d'etre, modus operandi, associating with serious drug offenders, because we know his stance on the evils of drugs. Proof of habitual association. Goodness me, mate, you could be offended. You could be actually charged into a lot of this were you not a police officer. fighting in a public place. Now, that could apply to any member of the parliamentary rugby team. Mr Chairman.
No, Dr. Calder.
Look, I just want to get to the point, which is it's coming up. Fighting in a public place, publishing a document or thing explaining the manufacture of explosives. Now, I mean, I have to put up my hand and say I've been young and I experimented with. I won't say what it was. Well, it was a long time ago, and it was probably in the chemistry lab, and we all done this in the chemistry lab. And it led to a satisfying little explosion, but of course under carefully controlled conditions, of course. Now, look, offences against persons or property. Now, this is the point that I'm very pleased we have come to, because Clause 9, offences, and we've got another member of the police force here, a very able member of the police force in the past, who actually made his contribution in the thin blue line with the aid of a large dog. And I'm talking about Mark Mitchell here, who's gone on to carry his abilities and security into some of the world's hottest trouble spots, and now brings it to bear on the rugby field for the parliamentary rugby team as the co-captain, and sitting next to him is the vice-captain Alfie Naro, two rather large gentlemen with extraordinary broad shoulders who are part of the potency of the team. It has to be said, part of the potency of the team. Now, Clause 10 of the Summary Offences Act 1981, which is, of course, the principal act which we are debating, talks about assault on police, prison or traffic officers. So were anyone to be so foolish as to offer violence to Mr Sabin or Mr Mitchell, they probably would regret it quite quickly. But after that assault had been offered, they would have been prosecuted under this principal act here. And now this is something that there's no excuse for, and this is something we don't want to see in New Zealand. We see it too often. We see it in hot days where mum or dad nips into the supermarket and leaves their child in a car without reasonable care or supervision. And this is a very serious issue. This is covered by the Summary Offences Act. Willful damage, graffiti, vandalism, tagging and defacing, all things not quite at the same level. Possession of graffiti implements. Acts endangering safety. Things endangering safety. And here we are. Possession of knives. And I have to pay credit to Tom McClay, because Tom McClay, when we were backbenchers together, I said, Todd, I got this idea for a members' bill. He said, I'll look and I'll find this act for you because I think I know where it is. And he did. He was a very, very helpful man. I want to pay credit to him in this committee stage reading. And it was about the possession of knives, 13A. And 13A of this principal act is why I base this legislation on. 13A of the principal act is what I base this legislation on. And it just seemed to me to make sense. Why is it that we can not walk around in our country with a knife in our possession? Well, it seemed perfectly sensible that we shouldn't be able to. But I posed the question to myself, well, with a knife, you can be dangerous, you can cause harm, of course, to somebody who's quite close. With these high-powered laser pointers, which this bill is about, and this is the principal act upon which we're talking, you know, the damage you can cause is grievous and huge. Catastrophic is the word that police have used in public statements when they're talking about the misuse of these devices. And they've got more powerful, and we come back to the principal act here, based on the carriage of a knife, the Summary Offences Act 1981. Why should you be able to carry in a public place a device in the form of a high-powered laser pointer, which is actually far more dangerous than a knife? Will I had the time, and was it relevant to this particular clause, which it isn't, I could mention military applications, which other members of the House have brought up in this House, pointing out how these are not toys, these are weapons. And a high-powered laser pointer I would submit, Mr Chair, is far more dangerous than a knife. But that is the reason the knife through the good works.
Simon O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Chair.